So, welcome to this lab on parameter estimation. Today we look at how we set up the objective function using MATLAB, for a simple problem like Michaelis-Menten, and also study how we can use the classic MATLAB optimizer which is called fminsearch. Today let us solve a simple problem. Let us consider a biological system that follows Michaelis-Menten kinetics with competitive inhibition. You might recall that the rate is given as V is V max into S by Km into 1 plus I by Ki plus S, as you see here, where I is the inhibitor concentration, Ki is the inhibition constant, and there are a few additional parameters here. So, you have a total of 4 parameters: V max, Km, I and K. I is not a parameter essentially, it's the experimental condition under which the so it's the experimental condition under which the experiment is performed. So, and there are 2 data sets in this given file, parameter estimation data.txt for I equals 10 millimolar and 20 millimolar. So, there are 2 approaches that we can follow to estimate parameters. One is a very simple elementary grid search assuming V max, Km and K are integers, and the second is any other algorithm we have discussed in class. So, maybe a standard minimization algorithm like fminsearch or simulate annealing or evolutionary algorithms. There is no need to try and code this up yourself, just try and use publicly available libraries. Right. And I want you to repeat this for 3 combinations: data set 1 alone, data set 2 alone and the combination of the 2 data sets. Right. So, this is there in the PDF I shared with you. So, you basically get hold of this data set. The rest of you have downloaded the data set and the got the data set. You have the problem statement. So, how will you go about solving this? You first need to recall the cost function. So how do you deconstruct this problem? So how would you set up a normal parameter estimation problem? Cost function that takes as input. So you need to essentially write some function like compute error of d comma k, d comma theta, whatever, right? So once you set that up, you now need to pass that on to some direct search algorithm. The simplest direct search algorithm is a really simple grid search algorithm. You just assume all your parameters are integers. What are your parameters in this case? Vm, Km, Ki. You have three parameters. Assume all of those are integers, just for simplicity's sake, and you scan from 1 to 100, 1 to 100, 1 to 100, and find out what's the best solution. And maybe you can use one of those as the starting input to fminsearch. Right? You'll have to understand how to pass this as your new cost function as the argument for fminsearch as well. Right? Because there is one minor difference. Normal fminsearch assumes that your function takes in an input. Here you will have an additional parameter as well. So it's usually in this case I think it might be okay. We don't have initial conditions, but sometimes you might have an initial condition as input as well. If you were integrating, here we are not doing any integration. Did you see that? We don't need to do integration. Why? There is no differential equation. We already have the form V is Vmax into S by K, Km dash plus S. So all you have to do is you don't have to do any integration. No. Essentially. And I.
So finally, after computing the best one, we can plot the
The parameters from grid search we have to pass to fminsearch.
Sorry?
The parameters from grid search we have to pass to fminsearch.
The best, that will be the starting. You need to give a starting point for fminsearch.
Okay.
Right?
So,
What is the starting point you would give? You just give 0, 0, 0 if you want, but it doesn't make sense. Right? Or you can give 1, 1, 1, some random starting point, but instead you could take the best output of fminsearch and of grid search and pass it to fminsearch. You need an X naught, right? For doing any exploration.
So generally, for approach 1, we're only doing grid search. We just run it through everything and
the entire space.
get the least cost. Do we have to write a for loop code, or can we just use LHS? Similar.
Do you have LHS in MATLAB?
Yeah. So LHS.
LHS design, that's the one?
LHS design.
You can use that too. But I am only meant for you to use a for loop.
For loop.
Because we said it will all be integers. Vm, Km and Ki.
Data inside this. See, so we just pass VM. Take it to position.
You're doing 5% inside the function.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not passing the function. I will just read it to you.
So, okay, take of VM.
No,
Sorry, V.
no.
Then you need VM.
So VM, KV, KI, pass afterwards. Then we will do input data and save it somewhere. I'm checking now security. What do you do with this?
No, you have to say call header. Of first call.
So what did you do with that?
For second one, you just I will.
If you want to pick the column of 4, you can do that now.
Just to call that with comma or no, comma. Something you need to do the first comma. Then colon 1. Just wait and put square. That's what you want. No, the whole thing with the column.
Seems like I can just do like this.
You won't get column. You won't get column.
What I want to do is pick some values.
Wait, one second.
No, I'll just read some why you want this space. You're going to see different matrices. No, you already have one again 3, so it is like double. Put it in the V equal to delta of V. V minus
V minus that.
we will have 3 finals. But V domain
Have you written the cost function?
To normalize, if a PDF just says some squared error. PDF just says some squared error, so do we have to normalize?
Up to you. Different cost functions, right? So you'll get a slightly better fit or a slightly worse fit. Here it may not make too much of a difference because the data is not scaled very badly. The values are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or something. So they're not like really that badly scaled. So I don't think it should be too bad. So what I did was I did normalize and I also took a 0.1% delta, 110% delta
just multiply delta and
denominator. Assume 0.1 or something like that, 0.1, 0.05 something. No, not alpha. Here we are assuming that it's not heteroscedastic.
computer. One minute. Oh, one minute. See, because it is stored. Okay. I saw it. I just want to know whether
No, the thing is, with cell level, you can't do certain stuff. Fine, you can't do
they are all going to be fine.
Yeah, so I'm saying like there are other functions that you might not be able to do with cell level.
And we are not able to see it converted to
God.
hey, how you can do it.
Anybody solved it? So the first thing you have to do is to establish a compute_error.m or your objective function, which should look somewhat like this. It has to basically have your it should compute the predicted value at each point, and then just use the same cost function we've discussed in class so far, right? So x measured minus x predicted by x measured into delta whole squared added across all the points, right? So for grid search there will be 3 for loops. I'm first talking about the cost function. So in cost function you don't even need a for loop, right? You just have a vectorized addition across all the data points.
Because it's not a filler. It's a double yeah.
And once you have the cost function, you just need to pass it to fminsearch, which is really simple. You just say x equals fminsearch of at x. No, so the parameter compute_error of d comma x and dataset comma x and some initial starting point. So, but you might find that for different initial points, you will get different x values. And you might get weird values as well. So, for example, there is nothing that stops you from getting negative values of the parameters. Right? So, you need to know that they are not sensible, eliminate them and restart with a different initial point. So, the minimum error I am getting is something like 27.53 for the second data set and 36.24 for the first data set, which is not too bad. Because if you look at the cost function, let us say x measured equals 10 and delta equals 0.1, right, which means that you do not want to like penalize any number between like 10% error, right. So, if xp is 9 or 11, between 9 and 11 it is a good thing, right. So, for 9 what is the error that you will get? You will get 10 minus 9 by 10 into 0.1 whole squared, that will actually be 1. Right. And you have 20 such points. So, a total error of 20 is actually very reasonable, but then you don't want the you don't want if of course if you got 10 as the exact value, you would have gotten a 0, right. For 9.5 what is it that you will get? You will get 1 by 4 as a contribution to error, but then you may want to then minimize the,
We are normalizing also.
this is post normalization,
Okay.
right. So, if you have 9.5, you will do 10 minus 9.5 by 10, which is basically 0.5 by 0.1. Oh, inside, no. So, you will actually get
10.0.
0.05 and 0.
0.05 again into 10. Yeah, no, it's 0.5 only. The multiplying 10 into 0.1, no, it will become
10 minus 9.5 by 10.
10 into 0.1.
10
Yes, 1 by 4.
No, it's divided by, it's 10 into
okay.
0.5.
right. So, but what happens if out of your 20 data points, 19 of them give 0 error and one of them gives a very big error, but it is still less than this 20, you might still think it is a good data point or a good parameter set. So, you will have to again worry about it. That is why your alpha will come into play, or maybe you want to minimize the median of the residuals or the maximum of the residuals, whatever.
So, what do you mean by total cost should be less than 10%?
What total cost less than 10%? No, I am saying you are allowing 10% variation around the mean,
Okay. Of the
right. So, because we were discussing yesterday, right. So, if you have a curve that looks like this, right, you do not want to penalize something that goes between your error bars, right. So, this is a bad curve or this is a bad curve, but anything that passes, you do not have to pass through the mean to be a good curve.
we will just find the value of mean for 2 data sets.
Here you have only value of mean, you do not have anything else, right. So, you only have I have not given you multiple points for at one time for one value of s or something like that. If you had that, you could use all of them, that is one way to go about it, or you could compute this standard deviation and then use that to compute a delta and then say I will not penalize if it is better than that delta and things like that. In this video, I hope you got an overview of how we can set up the objective function for optimization very easily in MATLAB, right, and how we compute the errors in a vectorial fashion importantly, and you will also appreciate how we can use fminsearch, which is the standard MATLAB optimizer for solving such optimization problems. In the next video, we will take a jump and I have an interesting guest lecturer who works for this company called Vantage Research, which consults with pharma in the space of quantitative systems pharmacology, and Dr. Rukmini from Vantage Research will introduce you to drug development and the use of modeling in drug development over the next series of videos.